All right, let's create a crystal class whoa, not sure what just happened there. That basically puts all of this stuff in one place so that we can use it and draw a bunch of them on the screen. So in order to do that, we should create a nice class constructor, class, blueprint. And I'm going to make that in its own file. So I'm going to create a new file at the root of the project called crystal.js. And we're going to make a class called crystal. And it has to have a constructor. It has to have a constructor function. It just has to. And ideally, in our system, what we want to be able to do is go to a point on the screen and draw a pixel, continue to do this until we run out of room. That's basically what we want to do. So when I see point on a screen, that means that when we create this crystal, we're going to want to create it somewhere. So I'm going to put it in the constructor. There's other ways to do that. You could pass it into the render function later, but this works for me. So we're going to need an X value, and whatever we get passed in, we'll use that. And then, just like we were doing before, we're going to need a layers array. Whoops, no, not an object. An array, which means we won't need this here, because we're going to move it. All right, great. And then we might as well build that as soon as we've asked it to create itself, and we do that by going through the constructors and picking a bunch of layers using random and adding them to the layers array. Cool. So that's really all we need to do there. And then the last thing that we want to do, this is the end of our constructor function. Why don't we add a render function? And in there, we're basically going to be doing this stuff, right? But there's going to be a little bit of difference here. Because we're going to be doing a lot of them, and we're doing a lot of translating and pushing and pulling and all that, let's go ahead and isolate any changes that we make to the matrix inside of a push and pop combination. The reason we need that most importantly is because we're going to translate to our X and Y that we got in the constructor in order to draw our crystal, right? So basically, we're going to get an X and Y from our sketch.js, and we'll take care of that later. It's going to come in and create a new crystal with all the layers that we want at a certain position baked in already. And then at some point, we're going to want to render that. And when we do, the matrix will push to where that crystal should exist, and it will render all those layers at that position for us. That's really it for the crystal. We've already kind of built it, and we're just moving everything over here. So why don't we try to create one here and make sure that everything is working for us. So we're just going to say const one crystal. Let's just make one crystal equals a new crystal. Remember, our constructor is going to expect two values, an X value and a Y value. And why don't we just give it what we've been using and one crystal.render. Now, this is going to cause problems, but it's also going to kind of work. Crystal is not defined. Good point. We forgot to include it here. Back to here, and it will render. Layers is not defined. What did I do? This dot layers. We're missing the this keyword. And line 18. Yep. Okay. Render of undefined crystal at 19. This dot layer dot render. Oh, yeah, I put this in the wrong place. It's not a this. That's for this guy here. Cool. So it does kind of work, but it's in the wrong place. Well, why is that? It's because each of our layers is also translating by width divided by 2, height divided by 2. Now remember, that's always relative to wherever you were to begin with. So what's happening is that here we're translating to the middle, and that's all fine. And then when we're drawing the layers, it's translating again by the same amount, which is why it ends up in the lower right-hand corner. So we have two options there. We can tell this not to do it and just take care of it in the layer. But the problem with that is we would have to send in the X and Y to each of our layers as well. I think it's easier to just use X and Y once here and then just get rid of this stuff in all of our layers because we don't really need it. This way, a layer is never tied to a position. It will always be relative to the origin. It will always be relative to where the crystal is, right? So you could choose to build this differently. This is just what makes the most sense to me. I don't feel like my layers should be translating. I feel like I should only be translating to create a crystal. So once we do that, we are only translating once and everything looks hunky-dory. I just want to make, see all these are nicely placed. Okay, cool. So I'm quite happy with that. And now we basically have our system. What's next is to create the grid and draw the stuff into the grid so that we have multiple crystals.